There was once a kingdom so proud, it thought the sun rose for it alone. A city of warriors whose drums could shake the morning sky, and whose markets glittered with gold and kola like treasures poured from heaven. But pride is a hungry fire. And one day, a single spark, just a market quarrel, lit a blaze that would burn Owu to ashes. This is the story of how a mighty kingdom was swallowed by war, and why its name still echoes like a ghost in Yoruba memory. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Long time ago, in the deep green heart of what is now Osun State, a kingdom rose where the forest whispered the language of warriors and traders alike. This was Owu, a land where the morning drums were as steady as the heartbeat of its people, and the scent of roasted yam mingled with the clang of blacksmiths' hammers. The Owu were not just farmers, they were sculptors of the earth itself. In neat ridges they planted yam and maize, coaxing life from the soil with the patience of rain. Their women wove cloth that danced with color, while their men shaped iron into tools and weapons sharp enough to command respect in distant lands. Trade was their lifeblood. From the Hausa and Fulani of the north came salt, leather, and horses. From the southern ports drifted the treasures of the coast, cowries, cloth, and rare goods from across the seas. Owu sat astride these routes like a leopard guarding its kill, its warriors ensuring no caravan passed without their blessing. At the center of it all stood the king of Owu Kingdom, a ruler whose word carried the weight of thunder. Around him, war chiefs and elders formed a council, their voices guiding the destiny of the kingdom. It was a place where law was upheld by the spear as much as by the spoken oath. To their neighbors, the Owu were a paradox, feared in war, yet respected in peace. They maintained alliances when it suited them, but their independence was a fortress no treaty could breach. In those days, Owu's power was like the sun at noon, bright, unchallenged, and seemingly eternal. But even the longest day must give way to evening, and in the distance, clouds were beginning to gather. By the closing years of the 1700s, Owu's wealth had ripened like a kola pod in the sun. Caravans came from the north heavy with leather, salt, and horses, returning with sacks of kola nuts so red and fresh they looked like drops of dawn. These nuts were more than food, they were currency, status, and the key to far-reaching trade. Owu's warriors guarded the routes like hawks, ensuring that every trader who passed beneath their watch paid homage in goods or coin. Alongside kola, there was the darker trade, slaves captured in distant wars, sold to merchants who vanished toward the coast, their ships waiting with open, silent hulls. It was a trade that fed Owu's coffers, even as it planted seeds of envy in the hearts of their rivals. The jewel of this prosperity was Apamu Market, set in the lands of Ifel. There, under a canopy of sun and dust, traders from Ijebu, Efel, Oyo, and the north gathered in a whirl of colors, voices, and scents. Cowries clinked in leather pouches, fabrics from distant lands fluttered in the wind, and the air buzzed with the sound of deals being struck. Yet, in the bright mirror of their glory, a shadow grew. The Owu carried themselves with a confidence so deep it sometimes soured into arrogance. They believed their power unshakable, their authority unquestioned. But pride is a fortress with unseen cracks, and far beyond their walls, watchful eyes were measuring those cracks for the day they might strike. The year was around 1821 when the first crack split the pride of Owu. It began in Apamu, the great market whose pulse was the lifeblood of many kingdoms. That day, the air was thick with the smell of roasted groundnuts, the chatter of traders, and the clink of cowries passing from hand to hand. But beneath the hum of commerce, tension was already whispering. Owu warriors, armed not for ceremony but for conquest, moved through the market like a storm brewing in clear skies. They seized goods, bales of cloth, sacks of kola, bundles of trade items from Ijebu traders. To Owu, it was the right of the strong, spoils claimed in the course of a campaign. To everyone else, it was a spark tossed into dry grass. The insult cut two ways. First, Apamu was not Owu land, it belonged to Hefel, the spiritual heart of the Yoruba people. To take goods there without leave was like striking the Uni's staff, an affront to Hefel's sovereignty. Second, the victims were Ijebu traders, people whose wealth was their pride and whose pride was sharp as a spear. In one act, Owu had wounded both Hefele's honor and Ijebu's purse. Messengers rode out from Ijebu and Hefele, bearing words meant to restore peace, return the goods, pay for the offense, make amends. But the answer from Owu was wrapped in iron refusal. They saw no wrong, only the exercise of power. And so, in the halls of Ijebu and under the sacred roofs of Hefele, whispers turned into plans. Retaliation was no longer a question of if, but when. And in that silent space between insult and action, the fate of Owu began to tremble. The Apamu insult was the ember, and the fire spread quickly. In the councils of the south, chiefs gathered in anger. In the sacred halls of the east, priests spoke of trampled honor. Their conclusion was the same: Owu's pride had grown too dangerous to ignore. Merchants demanded repayment. Priests called for honor restored. Warriors longed for conquest. Beneath oaths and secret plans, an alliance was born. Riders from the north joined, spearmen from the west answered. At the heart of Owu, the king sat unbowed, trusting in his warriors and the strength of his walls. Far to the south, a commander sharpened his plans like a blade. The strategy was clear: choke Owu until her strength withered. The east would be guarded, the south sealed, the north watched. No trade, no food, no help would reach the heart of the kingdom. Months into the siege preparations, another player stepped onto the field, the Egba. They had no love for Owu and saw opportunity in her coming fall. Their war chiefs pledged men and steel, not for honor, but for the spoils that would follow. By 1822, the trap had closed. Owu was a proud lion now caged, her every path watched by enemies. For nearly 6 years, the city lay encircled, the ring of steel and spears tightening like a snake around its prey. Inside the walls, life began to thin. The markets that once brimmed with yams and kola now lay bare. At first, families shared stored grain, then roots pulled from dry earth, then leaves boiled into bitter broth. When even those were gone, desperate hands softened scraps of leather in boiling water, chewing them for what little strength they could give. Hunger opened the door for sickness. Children's laughter faded into weak cries. Bellies swelled, not from plenty, but from the cruelty of starvation. Disease slipped through the narrow streets, carried on the breath of the weak and the weary. Yet the men of Owu stood their posts. From dawn until the moon rose pale, they lined the walls, spears steady, eyes sharp. Beyond the walls, enemy campfires burned like a ring of watching eyes. Ijebu warriors tightened the southern choke, Hefele guarded the eastern roads, Eberapa and Herjay sealed the north, and Egba hovered like vultures, waiting for the moment to strike. The siege was no longer just a battle of weapons, it was a slow war against time, hunger, and the will to endure. Within Owu's walls, the women became the silent generals of survival. While the men stood guard with spear and shield, the women waged their own war, a war against hunger, fear, and despair. They cradled children whose cries grew softer each day, rocking them in rhythm to lullabies that now sounded more like prayers. Their own bodies thinned, cheeks hollowing, eyes sinking deep, yet they gave the last mouthful to their children. Some went without food for days, carrying the weight of starvation with the quiet dignity of those who have no choice but to endure. By 1825, Owu's strength was a candle burning low, its flame flickering in the wind. Then came the day when the walls, once the pride of the kingdom, could hold no longer. At dawn, the enemy poured through like a flood, released Ijebu to the south, Hefele to the east, Eberapa and Herjay from the north, and the Egba sweeping in where the fighting was thickest. The clash was short, brutal, and final. Warriors who had held the line for years were cut down in the streets, their blood mixing with the dust. Men were slaughtered in groups, not for the chaos of battle, but with cold purpose to ensure Owu would never again rise in arms. The victors moved like fire through dry grass. Owu Hepele was put to the torch. The roar of flames swallowed the cries of the fleeing. Roofs collapsed, walls cracked, and smoke coiled into the sky like a dark banner of defeat. Shrines, where generations had laid offerings to the gods, were smashed and scattered. The great market, once alive with the song of trade, was stripped bare, its stalls overturned. Even the royal palace, the heart of Owu's pride, was torn down, its ashes drifting into the wind. Those not killed were taken. Women and children were seized and divided among the victors as spoils. Some were carried into the households of warriors, others sold into distant lands where the name Owu was unknown. Each captive was a thread pulled from the fabric of the kingdom, leaving it ragged and undone. When the smoke cleared over Owu Empire, its people were no longer a nation but a scattering of souls. Those who could run fled under the cover of night, slipping through forest paths and crossing rivers swollen with the season's rains. Many made their way westward into Egba territory, where they found refuge among new allies. In time, they would carve out a new home, Owu Empire, a shadow of the old kingdom, but still carrying its name like an ember from the fire. Not all were so fortunate. Many were herded in chains toward the coast, their faces turned away from the land they would never see again. In the markets of distant towns and the holds of waiting ships, the people of Owu became nameless goods, traded for coin and cloth, lost to the tides of the slave trade. For decades after the fall, the royal stool of the king remained empty. It was more than a vacancy, it was a wound, a silent admission that the kingdom which had once stood proud could not yet call itself whole again. Yet even in exile, the Owu spirit refused to die. In the courtyards of Abeokuta, elders told the old stories of warriors and kings, of markets and harvests, of the songs once sung in Owu squares. Women taught their daughters the patterns of the ancient weaves, men passed down the old war chants, and children grew up speaking the tongue of their forebears. Though their walls had fallen, their identity endured, a kingdom now carried in the memory of its scattered people. The fall of Owu was more than the death of a city, it was a tremor that shook the Yoruba world. Trade routes shifted like rivers changing course, flowing now through towns untouched by the war. Political alliances were redrawn, old enemies found new strength, and the balance of power in the region tilted forever. From the ashes came lessons, carved deep into memory. Pride, left unchecked, can turn allies into enemies. A single quarrel over trade can grow into a fire that consumes a kingdom. And when political grudges find willing partners, even the strongest walls can be brought low. Yet Owu's story is not only one of loss. In Abeokuta, where the survivors planted new roots, the Owu festival beats its drums each year, calling back the memory of their forebears. Elders speak the history aloud so the young will not forget. The names of kings, the tales of markets, the songs of warriors, all are carried forward like torches through the dark. Today, the Owu live on, not behind stone walls, but within the fabric of a people who refused to let their identity vanish. Their kingdom fell, but their spirit did not bow. In this, they left the greatest legacy of all, the truth that even in ruin, a people can rise again, carrying the echo of their name across centuries.